What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Eeveelutions in Pokemon Go. But what I decided to do is break this down into two parts. The first one is going to be taking a look at the current Eeveelutions in the game, talking about where they rank out among their types, so you can decide whether or not you should invest Stardust in them. The second episode is going to be talking about future Eeveelutions, getting a look at them from a Generation 4, Generation 6, and then potentially talking about a new Eeveelution getting added in for Generation 8 because of the connection to Pokemon Let's Go. So that's going to be a little bit more of a futuristic video, so if you do enjoy this video, you will definitely enjoy the next one. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the episode. The order of this list is going to be by CP, so let's go ahead and get into the number 5 spot. And that is Umbreon, max CP of 2023. Umbreon is a pure dark type Pokemon. When we take a look at the stats, it is so unfortunate for Umbreon, because out of all of the Eeveelutions, I have to say design wise, I think Umbreon looks the coolest and is going to be a lot of fun to use. But during the translation, it just matters so much about what the attack stat is, and Umbreon has a very low attack stat at 126, ranking out at 279th. That is absolutely terrible for Umbreon, because if you check out the stamina, if you check out the defense, it does actually have decent stats. It's just its attack is so low, it really pulls it down, at least from a dark typing. That's why you don't hear as much about it. When we talk about the ideal moveset, it at least has a decent ideal moveset from a dark typing, so it doesn't basically get anything held back from that standpoint. So when you're talking about Umbreon's current ranking, I would argue that Umbreon is probably the 6th or 7th best dark type currently in the game. So then you might be wondering something like, well, what is it going to be like if Generation 4 gets added in? Well, unfortunately for Umbreon, it does get worse, because there is going to be even more competition with Honchkrow, Darkrai, and Weavile to worry about. This could potentially push Umbreon outside of the top 10 from a dark typing, and that's going to be very unfortunate. By the way, if you are curious about the naming trick for Umbreon, if you haven't used it, I have it on the screen for you. But then beyond that, I also wanted to go ahead and show you what the shiny sprite of Umbreon looked like so that you can be ready for the community day. Anyways, that's Umbreon. It is very unfortunate, like I said, because I do enjoy it. But let's go ahead and get into the next Pokemon. At the number 4 spot, we have Jolteon, max CP of 2,730. Jolteon is a pure electric type Pokemon. Let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. When we take a look at the stats, it's going to be a little bit of a flip from Umbreon, because its attack stat is going to be its best at 232, ranking out at 33rd in Pokemon Go. Jolteon's overall ranking is going to be 49th. You can go ahead and check out that stamina at 130. We're going to see that quite a bit. But let's go ahead and take a look at that ideal moveset. It's going to be Thunder Shock and Thunderbolt. So something interesting about Jolteon is, as it stands right now, it's going to be the best non-legendary performer from an electric type. The only Pokemon able to outperform it are something like Raikou and Zapdos. So Jolteon's actually in a fairly good position right now. But there is going to be competition from a Generation 4 standpoint, and that is going to be Electivire and Magnezone, potentially competing for that best non-legendary. Neither one of these I don't think are going to be able to outperform the legendaries, but like I said, as long as they're going to be accessible, they could still be a very good option for like a 3rd place position. Beyond that, if you are curious what the sprite looks like for the shiny, I want to go ahead and put it up on the screen, as well as the naming trick that you can do if you are trying to get a Jolteon. Let's go ahead and move into the number 3 spot. And that is Flareon, max CP of 2,904. Flareon is a pure fire type Pokemon. Let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. So that attack stat is climbing at 246, ranking out at 16th in Pokemon Go. Absolutely fantastic. That stamina once again at 130, ranking out at 35th overall in Pokemon Go. So definitely very impressive for Flareon, considering you only have to use 25 candies to be able to get it. But beyond that, we have the ideal moveset of Fire Spin and Overheat, which is going to be one of the most ideal fire type movesets that you can have. So this is going to be another indicator that Flareon is actually pretty solid in Pokemon Go. So as it currently stands, Flareon is a very similar position as Jolteon. you have two legendary Pokemon able to outperform it. That's going to be Entei and Moltres. And really it only competes with a Blast Burn Charizard. But I've seen multiple cases where Flareon technically edges out Charizard. So we're actually going to say that Flareon is currently in third. But when you talk about future competition, there's going to be three Pokemon that I think at least deserve a mention. And that's going to be Heatran, Magmortar, and Infernape. Although Infernape probably will not outpace Flareon, having a little bit of competition could put Flareon potentially in the 5th position once Generation 4 gets added in. Along with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the shiny sprite, and then I'm also going to put the naming trick that you can put on the screen to make yourself get a Flareon for Community Day if you have not used it. Let's go ahead and get into the number 2 spot, and that is Espeon, max CP of 3000 CP. Espeon is a pure Psychic type Pokemon. Let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. Go ahead and check that out, the attack stat at 261, ranking out at 12th in Pokemon Go. This is going to be the highest attack stat that we have in the game for the Eeveelutions. Once again, a little bit of a red flag is going to be that stamina at 130, but we have seen that quite a bit. The overall ranking is 38th in Pokemon Go. Let's go ahead and take a look at the ideal moveset. It's going to be Confusion and Future Sight. Once again, this is going to be an absolutely fantastic moveset from a Psychic typing, so there is going to be no red flags for Espeon. When you talk about where Espeon currently ranks in the game, you do have Mewtwo, of course, but then in second place, it's a little bit of a toss-up, because Alakazam technically can outperform it, at least from an attack standpoint, as long as it is able to dodge more. But Espeon acts a little bit more tanky, so some people actually prefer Espeon over Alakazam. But because Alakazam does have a higher attack stat, I'm actually going to currently put Espeon in at third place. But there is going to be a little bit of good news. When you're talking about Generation 4, there's actually not going to be too much competition. Although there are going to be quite a bit of Psychic type, for instance with a Mythical, but when you're taking a look at the actual stats itself, the only competition that it's going to face is potentially Gallade. That's really going to be it, so Espeon's actually going to be in a fairly good position. But beyond that, if you are curious what the shiny sprite looks like, I do have it on the screen. I have to say that this is probably my favorite out of the 5 that are in the game. But beyond that, if you are curious, at least as far as the naming mechanism is concerned, this is what you would have to name Espeon if you are able to do that on Community Day. But beyond that, you just have to walk the 10 kilometers like you would with Umbreon, and then you have to evolve it during the day to get an Espeon. You would have to evolve it at night to get an Umbreon. Let's go ahead and move into the number 1 spot, and that is Vaporeon with a max CP of 3157. Vaporeon is a pure water type Pokemon. Let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. So there's going to be a little bit of a red flag for Vaporeon, mostly related to that attack stat. At 205, it does get outpaced by quite a bit of water Pokemon now, unfortunately. But if you check it out, the stamina is going to make it act a little bit more tanky than what most Pokemon would in Pokemon Go. When we take a look at the ideal moveset, it is Water Gun and Hydro Pump. This is actually going to be a fairly good moveset from a water typing. Most of the best Pokemon, however, do have Waterfall instead. So where does Vaporeon currently rank out in Pokemon Go? Well, it really only has 2 pieces of competition, and that's going to be Kyogre and Gyarados. So Vaporeon is a lot like Flareon and Jolteon, kind of hovering around that 3rd position. The only difference was there are just simply less legendaries right now. But when you're talking about future competition from a water typing, there is unfortunately going to be a little bit more competition. For instance, we have Palkia and Empoleon. These are 2 Pokemon that are going to directly compete with Vaporeon, unfortunately pushing it down. If you are curious what Vaporeon would look like in a shiny form, I do have it on the screen, and then also with a naming mechanic. If you haven't actually done that, this is what you would use. So let's go ahead and get into the list of which Pokemon I think you should prioritize over. And that's going to be Espeon in at first place. I think Espeon's actually in a fairly good position because it doesn't have too much competition from a Generation 4 standpoint. Espeon is actually a solid option and something that I personally prefer over something like an Alakazam, at least attacking from a Psychic typing. In its second, we have Vaporeon. Vaporeon, it's a little bit unfortunate because it is going to have some competition from a legendary standpoint, With something like a Palkia, I mean, come on, that's going to be so hard to compete against. But at least with that, it's going to kind of hold out. It's still going to be a decent option from a non-legendary. So I do think it's worth at least having one, but not necessarily powering it up. In third place, you have Flareon. Flareon is once again going to be also in a bad situation because it has more competition coming from that legendary typing. When that legendary Pokemon comes in, Heatran, it's just going to be so much harder to compete, at least from a top 5 standpoint, but still it's going to be a solid non-legendary option. Jolteon, on the other hand, is not going to have much legendary competition, but instead it's going to have competition from non-legendary Pokemon, specifically Electivire and Magnezone. So you can't help but think that maybe Jolteon is not going to be the best option. Then up next we have Umbreon. Umbreon, once again, very unfortunate that its attack stat is so low. If it was at least just okay, this Pokemon would be fantastic. Maybe it's going to be good to drop into a gym, but other than that, it's not going to have exactly a lot of usability in the game. Anyways, I hope you did enjoy this episode. If you did, I do think you will enjoy the next one, where we take a little bit more of a futuristic look. We're going to be talking about Generation 4, Generation 6, taking a look at what could potentially be a new evolution in the game. I'm going to go ahead and basically give my prediction on how that is going to work. Anyways, I hope you did enjoy the episode, and I will see you next time.
Hit me like a tidal wave.